Hello, how are you, brother? I am doing my best to keep my word. I apologize. I wanted to get this to you earlier today, but it's like the last 15 minutes of the day, and I want to keep my word because I said I would do this, get this to you on Friday. I've been working all day, so if I look a little tired, it's been a long day. So I'm going to try to make this quick because I know you don't have a lot of time, and that's why I chose to just do a quick little video. And I wanted to keep my word because I said I would share with you how I gained this insight of the gods versus the gangsters, or the gods and the gangsters. And a little bit about me. I was, somewhat religious during my younger years after college. Well, really quite religious. And I thought it was that time of my life to kind of go into church and, do that. And this church that I became a part of was one of our parts of our lifestyle was to study the Bible on a daily basis. So often, I would study the Bible every single day. And even, I would like randomly teach people, out on the street. We had like ministries and so forth. So I did that for quite some time. So I learned my Bible really well. And then, the church kind of broke up and I went my separate, went on, because of scandal. It seemed like every church I was ever a part of is always some type of scandal, usually related to sex or money. So I just, was like, there's no way God can be really in this. And I was devastated, Then, I had like major revelations and epiphanies that, all of this is really in the mind. And so that led me to studying like esoteric science, metaphysics, um, looking into Buddhism. And I always say Buddhism saved my life because Buddhism helped me to understand it's all about what is within you. So, leading on, I wanted to start a business, and then I was taking some business classes at a not-for-profit at the Harlem Empowerment Zone in New York, in Harlem. And so as I was studying different business, what it is to be an entrepreneur and so forth, I saw the terminology that was being used. In the terminology, although it was different, there were aspects of it that were identical to certain spiritual teachings. It's just that it's just a different word for some of the same type or the opposing principles. So I began to realize that there was a connection here. It's like there's a connection here. And so, time went on. Started delving more into, esoteric science and studying different teachers, listening to different teachers and things of that nature. And I began to run into people because that's how life is, and I began to put the pieces together, reading between the lines. I think Malcolm X says, read between the lines, and it was like Steve Jobs that says, like, connect the dots. So that's what I started to do, is like I started to connect the dots and, sort of like read between the lines. And, I was working in this office and, all the guys always talked about the Godfather. So I was like, well, let me sit down and watch this movie and really see what's the big deal about this movie. And I was never really a big fan of Scarface. I thought the movie was just so violent. Just violence, just senseless violence. And even revisiting Scarface after years. I think the first time my mother wouldn't let me see it when it first came out. So I finally got to see it, after the hype, so to speak, and then I came back and revisited years later. And as you mature and become wiser, and you sit and you look at and you dissect this stuff, and so having gained these insights now, then sitting down looking at The Godfather, I realized that what the brothers were talking about, that somehow they missed it. Like they missed the whole point to this movie here, and because they're looking at just that he's getting what he wants, by intimidating and putting fear into other people. And yeah, that works. Even in my own personal journey, one of the things I've learned is that, in the ego, fear is to the ego what love is to the soul. So fear is very deceiving. it can often elude you that you're getting some aspect of respect or love, but it's really a deception. So, um, one day I was out, and one of the guys that I would go past his restaurant where he works to use the restroom and maybe get a quick bite or something, and he and I had a deal. Sometimes I would give him a ride home, and he would give me something to eat, things like that. And so he grew up Buddhist, and we were talking, and he's a African American regular dude, and so this most African Americans, as you know, well, his family's from the Caribbean, but still, even from the Caribbean, they don't study Buddhism, or they don't grow up Buddhist. So you have this average person, typical African American. I don't mean it in a bad way, so I'm trying to choose my words carefully. That grew up Buddhist, and so I was like, okay, that's interesting. So he said he had never read the Bible until he was like in his late teens or early 20s. And he went to read the Bible, and he said, one of the things that he realized right away is like, no God would write this, And it made me laugh because I had started putting the pieces together. And he's like, this is, no God would write this, thou shalt have no other God before me, and, I'll damn you, and, all the hell and fire and brimstone type stuff. And he's like, only a dude thinks like this. This is a man. And I was like, wow, so, especially as it pertains to the Old Testament. And if you really read the Old Testament and get into all the wars, it's really like straight gangster. It's like go in, kill even the women and the children in the end. And so, it's like when you really understand God, it's like that's not God, and so the Old Testament really is straight gangster. And then you have the New Testament, which is a rise of, the Christ who's, for salvation and so forth. But really all of that is all symbolic. It's allegorical for, really our experience in life. The whole objective is going from the flesh into the spirit. And so when you think of a gangster, it's an archetype. And so you have the gangster, you have the pimp, and you have the slave master. All of them exploit people at a disadvantage, which is a very cowardly thing to do. When you really take some time to think about it, because only a person with true character and integrity would fight on fair ground. And so, from an allegorical aspect, you could say, for the sake of this conversation, that the gangster, the pimp, the slave owner, they are archetypes of the same thing, which would be somewhat of an evil aspect. Or you would even say, I would even nickname it the devil, but not just that. Because when I take in consideration the symbolism of this devil character, it's based on ego and fear. And so the universe has a way of teaching you. It will align you with things when it wants you to hear it and see it. So anything could be a teacher at any given time, and that's how I treat life. Like anything is my teacher at any given moment, because I'm always looking for the message from the universe. And so I was looking at A Bronx Tale, and there's a scene in A Bronx Tale in which the young man goes to the gangster and he says, is it better to be loved or feared? And the answer, as you know, if you've seen the movie, is that the gangster says it's better to be feared. So when you take it into from a biblical sense, the God of the Old Testament is all about fear. It's like, fear God. And so, and then it goes into, from the New Testament, is like love. So you move from fear into love, which is really the purpose of any life journey and the reason why we incarnate. And it's really to understand those distinctions. So you have those distinctions within yourself, but also we're maneuvering in a society that is a mirror image of spiritual aspects or principles. So the mirror image or the society we live in is possible because of the imprints that the human mind puts on the spiritual realm. So you can't have anything in the physical, tangible realm without it first being imprinted in the spiritual realm. Okay, let me get down to gods versus gangsters. Because I was going to try to make this no more than 15 minutes. So, the gods versus the gangsters. So, a god is a creator. Now, the Bible teaches that God is love. Okay, so love is a vibration, it's a frequency. When you take in consideration into what we're living in, love is often downplayed. A lot of marketing and movies and so forth in the media portray someone who's very loving as very weak and so on and so forth. And yet, often these people who can kill and do all these violent things are considered so powerful. And, so that's a trick on the mind. And when you really learn who or what the creator is, or, when I really learned who or what God is, it was exactly the opposite of everything I had been taught as a, I guess, Christian. We never called, when the church I was a part of, we considered ourselves disciples of Christ. So I encountered the true God, or the true presence, the divine presence. It's very powerful, but also very, very gentle. And what's so beautiful is that this time of year, which is spring, is one of the most clear evidence of this presence, because you begin to witness things come back to life, if you will, even though they weren't really dead. They were dormant for the winter, but you can see it in action. You watch the trees go from being bare to being full with these beautiful green leaves. That's evidence. In Buddhism, they call that kukachu. And so, which is the power of life, is the essence of life, is what makes life live. And so when you are understanding of that, then you know that you are a part of that and you are God. And so you're therefore a creator. So there's either one, you make a choice of what you're going to be. In the book, The Science of Getting Rich, and I apologize if I'm going all over the place, because sometimes my spiritual understanding, I understand it, but I don't always have the language to articulate it. That's why I listen to a lot of spiritual teachers, so I can just to find a way of articulating some of these understandings I have, because they're spiritual. And so it's a vibration that I receive. So I don't always have the human language to articulate it. But anyway, did I digress? Coming back. So the evidence, in Buddhism, they call it kukachu. And so when you, in the Science of Getting Rich, that's where I left off, they talk about the two places you can pull from for money. And it gets deeper, but I'm not going to go that deep. I have a few more minutes. I don't want to, go too far and, lose you doing a video that's too long. But you can pull from the competitive road or energy field, or, which is the gangster, or you can pull from the creative, which is the God. And the objective is to be a God, because when you're a God, you don't have to be a gangster. It's really beneath you. And it's like so far. And like that's what troubles me the most about the direction that our people are going in. Because I grew up at a time, I got a remnant of it at least, and I'm so grateful I did, where Black people honored and dignified themselves, not based on how much money they had in their pockets, but it was based on actually really how you could hold to a standard. And so of self-respect, integrity, and dignity. And they were based on, yes, they were based on Christian teaching, because that's all we had. And later on in rebellion, people became Muslim, especially through the 1960s. during the Civil Rights Movement and the Black Panthers and so forth. Um, Not that I don't think the Black Panthers, were they Muslim? Maybe some. But anyway, I digress. Um, is that black people were aspiring to something greater, and even though that God was something that they acquired knowledge of through slavery and so forth, their sincerity in becoming more godlike would have ultimately revealed the true God to them because they were sincere in their pursuit and understanding and worship of this God. It would have only been a matter of time before the true God or the true aspect or truth of the power would have been revealed to the people. So there's definitely an agenda, one, to keep that knowledge hidden or secret, or keep it away from the people, um, because then they will basically have their own power. There's no need for a government um, when you are being governed by God, and so, or the highest power, that is. And so sometimes I don't even like to call the deity, God, because it's so the opposite of everything. So now, this is my last point. I had a powerful revelation today. I hope I can communicate it. I believe the government itself, they are the ultimate gangsters, which you already know. But they also perpetuate a gangster mindset into the population so that everybody operates in a parasitic fashion, so we all become parasites on one another instead of creators, and we start to feed on the planet. And this is an effort to create a species of humans or mankind that is disconnected from their true life source. And therefore, although the presence of the divine is within all of us, it remains dormant, and it becomes no more than a life support system. We live on it, but it's just there. It's just dormant. So I hope I've expressed it. I did have a powerful revelation today in relation to um, how can I put it? I'm going to make this my last point because I've went over 15 minutes. That's 17 minutes. Um, there was a fear-based God that we often learn about, the whole thing of going to hell, and if you had to refrain from sins, and and all this frame of mind. And what occurred to me as I was thinking, because there's um, the aspects or that pertain to love, and there's a scripture in the First Corinthians says, "Love is kind, love is da da da." And so I was thinking about that today, and I know I'm going to not be able to quite express it the way it came to me today. You know what? I'll share that on another day. But I'll say this. They often say fear God. Okay, so you either fear God or you fear the gangster. Could it be the one and the two are the same? Godfather, Father God. Okay. And remember, the gangster said it's better to be feared, and so then loved. And then it says, we know God is love. So the gangster has no love, you see, and therefore compensates with being feared as love, because the gangster never knows love. In actuality, the gangster is probably the most insecure person in the room, but it knows how to manipulate. And whereas a God doesn't, it doesn't work that way. God has no reason for anything to be jealous of, because God is in all, as all, I am that I am. So none of those characteristics line up with God, because if God is love, and First Corinthians lists all these attributes of of God. Love is, love is kind, love is patient. It does not boast. It does no records of wrong. It's not easily angered. Okay? So how can God as love have these attributes of love according to the same book, yet it says I'm an angry God and a jealous God, and thou shalt have no. So you have to read between the lines. So I don't know if I did this any justice. I have my little notebook because I was going to, draw it down. There's more, because it's really about developing discernment. When do you operate as a gangster? When do you have to be a God in gangster clothing, just like Jesus says you must be a lamb in wolf's clothing. You know, then you become all powerful if you can master that. There's power in that, but also, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop because sometimes I get a little carried away because I get excited. So thank you, brother. My battery's about to die. Lucky you. I'm sorry. Now it's at 21 minutes. I did go over 15. But thank you. It was an honor to meet you. I'm grateful to have a brother out there like yourself who cares about the challenges of our people. But the only thing that's going to help us really is to really know the truth, and remember who we are. And I had a Chinese man, that's the last thing I was going to say, and he said the world won't know peace until we as black people remember who we are. And so with that said, peace. And, prayerfully one day we'll have another opportunity to build. Many blessings.